My name is Joe Milazzo, and the novel is called Crepuscule with Nellie. Crepuscule with Nellie is a work of speculative historical fiction that depicts the lives of Thelonious Monk and his wife Nellie. It does not attempt historical accuracy, however, nor is it an ekphrastic experiment meant to mimic Monk's brilliance with his signature dissonant harmonies and angular melodic twists. Instead, much like Thelonious Monk's composing, Crepuscule with Nellie creates a whole new architecture in which to tell its story.
Book lovers unite! I'm Demethius Jackson, and you're listening to the Chapter 1 podcast. The greatest stories ever written all begin with Chapter 1. In each episode, our guest authors will share their first chapters with you. On today's episode, I have an amazing writer, Joe Milazzo. He's a writer, editor, educator, and designer, and he knows even more about jazz music than I do. Joe's going to be reading from his book entitled Crepuscule with Nellie, and it starts right now.
I'm going to read basically the first 2 pages of the novel, which constitute something of the first chapter. This book is not really organized into chapters, but these first 2 pages will definitely give you a flavor of what to expect from this novel. Ice cream. What? Strike what? Struck? Ice cream. Is it a bump? Pug-nosed. It's a fact. Ice cream. May I have the next one? That fact? Dropped lollipop. What I mean, Nellie. What do you mean? That it's nothing but a cold wind licking away at the hair and specks of skin, fly fingerprints, spots and specks, and curls of dry filth. And to get at my warm glass? Go rattle somebody else's windows. Treats this hour, know how. Ice cream. Time. It is. It's nothing. A little bit of mice. A mint name. I mean, a name you meant. Nellie? Sure as you were born. I sit up, and if I do, I will surely be sick. Ice cream. There it is again. Like new lipstick on an old begetting and begat night. Nellie, don't you do anything? Won't you get the cups? Run the scoop under the hot tap? Of course, in the minute you give me, a minute, I'll sit up right into this heartburn. If I could do more than pull my bones together and make myself see what it is. Oh, but I need my pan. Again, it's only nothing, Nellie, only a step, some steps going from some easy gallop, a shuffle me off someplace else on this earth without fail. That's a fact. Nothing but a post wringing itself off the knob, a light sucking its innards out, Christmas chains, a train, a truck, a should know better well before dawn, 2 minutes past a few minutes past 1, can't be. You know it is. Ice cream! Hey! A cat or rat or dog that's jumped his fence and snapped at the moon. It's nothing but you witching yourself, Nellie, you hearing your hearing, and not a word for the herd. If it's nothing, and it is, it's far away or down below. I'll sit up. I'll find my dressing gown. What about 27 families who, do I have to remind you? Do I? I suppose I do. 27 name-brassed and plated families who are allowed to lay exactly where they lay, perfectly asleep. 27 families blessed with broken buzzers who anyway and besides don't know what hours like these look or sound like, laying between you and whatever is going on down in that street. It's a drunken taxi whistle, a hum, somebody skidding or taking a stab. It's nothing like what you won't ever see around here, Nellie. Nothing but a beggar dropping his squeeze box and his dented old tin cup. Hey, pistachio! I know this one. It's a song. Perplexed as polka dots, often cross-eyed up for a ghost, a winding sheet hung on 3 holes, 2 A's and a B. Easy to admit they're often mistook, but no, they aren't even cousins. One hayseed, one Georgie Porgy. Frozen, icy novelties. See, Nellie, it's only just a dumb old melody after all, pawing around a sad circus bear who loves his Pepsi Cola and 7-Up way too much. It's happy birthday for days I'd rather send to the dump. Played twice is overplayed, so why won't you just let me turn over and find some kinder lumps to coddle in this mattress? Old bear, ride your ball on to the next door. I've got that nausea. It's sitting up in my lap, my ribs. Ice cream, creamy, icy. Here comes the caravan. Should I make this face or this one? Here it comes, gypsying all the whole way. My caravan. Scream! To think you'd imagine I'd left you somewhere, Monk. I haven't been possuming in my sleep, so yes, sir, right away, sir, ice cream it is. Sir, you'd think I have been tick-tock, hypnotized, just waiting for your word. No dreams for Nellie unless the spell is split apart. Ice cream! Ice cream, see? Not if you had the stomach I've got now, Monk. And it a quarter of. What if the landlady was watching? What if that telescope across the way was swung to stare over here? I can't imagine. A pox on that good-for-nothing super and the landlady and her cadavers, opera glasses, her filing cabinet, 2 whole drawers dedicated to Monk, Thelonious, Nellie, spouse. Must be fit to burst, like a Rockefeller shirt front. Nellie, Nellie, Nellie. Nellie, Monk, Nellie. That's what you're about to want to whoop.
Okay, I'm sitting here with Joe Milazzo. Well, okay, I gotta say, man, that, I've spoken to a lot of, I guess you could say, historical fiction writers, but I've never actually spoke to someone who wrote, or specifically wrote about the jazz era, which is pretty awesome. Were you always interested in jazz?
I think when I got to college, music was always very important in my household growing up. My father was an opera aficionado, and music was all around. And I'm of a generation where your musical affiliations were very important, and they kind of identified you socially, like in high school. There were the goth kids, the punk kids, the stoner kids, the kids who listened to top 40 / whatever was on MTV, right? And you sorted your social circles kind of that way. But a number of things happened as I was started to transition into college, and I just remember I decided I don't know anything about jazz. I'm gonna just learn as much about it as I can. I'm gonna make myself like it. I had maybe heard 1 or 2 records and thought I could like this. I like the spaciousness of the music. I think I probably responded first to the way that jazz recordings sound, where there's a sense of space around the small ensemble, and from there I just started listening and acquiring records and sort of following the connections between sidemen and leaders, right? That kind of thing, and definitely sort of self-taught in terms of knowing jazz history at all, just from listening to records, reading liner notes on the back of records, and doing some reading on my own, looking for books about the history of the music. Yeah.
Which was interesting to me about Crepuscule with Nellie is the fact that it's talking about the life of Thelonious Monk. And Thelonious Monk is who brought me to jazz.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it was around the same time, around college. Really? Yeah, so, it was something that was new to me, and of course, I jumped into the deep end with Miles Davis and was completely turned off. I think I listened to Bishop's Brew and just did not understand it at all, and was pretty much done. But then I discovered Thelonious Monk because, just like he's a piano player, I was a piano player too.
Okay, yes. I'm looking at your piano right now.
Oh, yeah. So it was Straight No Chaser.
The film?
The album.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the album Straight No Chaser that really helped me to understand what jazz was, and then that led me to John Coltrane, and Dizzy Gillespie, the Duke, and then I was able to go back to Miles Davis and appreciate what he did.
Well, Miles and Monk had a tempestuous relationship, to say the least. There's a famous story And there was actually a scene in the novel that made reference to it that I eventually took out. There's a famous recording where Miles argues with Monk, and it's captured on tape, and it's Miles did not like the fact that Monk would often not comp behind soloists. Like, Monk would stop playing because he was like, you don't need me. Or he had a lot of different reasons why he would do that.
Yeah.
They called it strolling, or I think he called it strolling. But anyway, Miles did not want that. Miles wanted somebody supplying harmonies for him as he soloed. And it's a really interesting argument to hear. I think Miles deeply respected Monk, but I don't think he enjoyed playing with him, which is kind of interesting. But you've got two individuals who know exactly what they want to do and are very uncompromising.
Yeah, and sometimes that can make for a beautiful thing, and
Yes.
then sometimes it could be disastrous.
Yes, I mean, Monk definitely was the kind of musician who seemed to thrive in a situation where he could mentor other people. The most enduring bands, or when people think of Monk, they often naturally think of John Coltrane, because Coltrane did do this sort of important apprenticeship with Monk. But there were plenty of other younger musicians that Monk helped over the course of their career, which is also something that the novel kind of plays with as much as it talks about Thelonious Monk's career.
I'm curious, what is it about Thelonious that drew you to him, or why was this an important story to tell?
Well, there's a really long answer to that question. I mean, it starts with the music. His music is so singular and unusual, and then if you ever see film footage of him playing, he did not play like anybody else. He did not use conventional or standard technique. He almost plays like a drummer. As a piano player, you'll appreciate this, right? I mean, he would not arch his fingers when he played. He would often play with his fingers very flat, which explains how he got a distinctive sound out of an instrument that it's a little bit harder, I think, to get a distinctive sound out of. So his touch is very unusual. So it started with the music and how it just, changed my notions of what music is and can be. And also, in terms of reading about him, somebody described this book as like fan fiction, and I'm totally okay with that because in a way it is. The book was driven by being a fan first. And being a fan, I wanted to learn about this person's life, and there was a surprising dearth of information. But what was interesting was that you would get these little glimpses. So, like the novel is titled Crepuscule with Nellie. I didn't pick that title just to make people stumble whenever they tried to say the name of my book. I picked that title because it's the title of one of Monk's most famous compositions. And, I remember hearing it for the first time and looking at that title and going, how do these words fit together? What does this even mean? Did some educating of myself. Crepuscule means twilight. Nellie was his wife, and that was my introduction to, this is a song written for his wife. How interesting. What does this song tell us about who that person was? And from there, it was just, the only way to answer that question was to make up a story, because Nellie Monk is not really represented, as so many women aren't, in the historical record. But she was apparently an incredibly important person, not beyond just being his wife and the person who offered him emotional support. She was apparently like his de facto manager. She was more involved in his career than I think people appreciated at the time.
Probably more than what was conventional at that time.
Yeah, I think so. And he apparently liked to keep things in the family. He had a small circle of people he trusted, and it was hard to penetrate that circle. And that was also really interesting to me. My own family situation, I felt like I saw kind of echoes between the Monk family situation and the family situation that I knew growing up. So it also became a way to talk about those things that were very personal for me without basically writing a memoir.
Yeah.
Which wasn't something that I was really interested in. I was interested in taking that personal material and trying to do something different with it and let my imagination transform it somehow.
Yeah. Very cathartic.
Yeah, I guess it's hard to talk about, because at another level, it's also very much about Thelonious Monk and the 50s and New York and the social milieu of that time and all of that stuff. So, I'm not an unbiased reader, unfortunately. So, I mean, I see a lot of different things happening in it, but yeah, I mean, I would also say that jazz was one of the things that helped me understand and learn about the history of black experience in this country. I felt like I learned a lot about civil rights movement and African American culture just by learning about jazz.
Ironically, same with me.
Really?
Yeah. When I was in high school, everybody was listening to Tupac and Biggie, and I was too. But then I was also listening to the Motown greats, Luther Vandross, Aretha Franklin. And then I fell in love with classical music. Yeah, it was actually Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach, that brought me to classical, just like it was Thelonious that brought me to jazz. So
it's all about that piano, huh?
Yeah. But the music, I think, is another way to experience a time that's gone that just isn't here anymore. But yet you can still feel it through what was produced during that time.
Yeah. Well, and my aunt was African American, so I grew up. My extended family, part of my experience of extended family is an experience of being around African Americans and African American culture. Because I was born into it, it was not unusual. Yeah. Only as I got older did I realize all of the things that had been difficult for my aunt and uncle over the years, being an integrated couple in, for all intents and purposes, the South. Barely 10 years after the end of segregation in this part of the country. It was also a way to reconnect with early experiences, to understand better where I came from, where my family came from, a bunch of different things. Yeah. At one level, I think people look at me and they see a white guy and they say, what is this person doing writing about black Americans and jazz and a time before he was even born? And for me, the answers to those questions are very apparent, and it's like, well, because this was my family situation, and generationally, I had access to certain things, and so forth and so on. But I'm not there standing over the shoulder of every reader to tell them that, right? So the work has to stand on its own.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think you did a fantastic job with it.
Oh, thank you.
Crepuscule with Nellie, is more than just a story about Thelonious and Nellie and the people that were close to them. It's very much your own work of art. Yeah. In fact, even the language you use is very poetic, and I described it before as you were reading, that it has that certain syncopathic rhythm to it. Yeah. Then I later read that you do poetry as well, so it makes perfect sense. So did you always have this writing style, or was this something that evolved just for the book?
I'd like to think that every writing project that I do, I have to give myself over to whatever language is demanded of that project, or demanded, by that project. I did not train as a poet. My training was originally as a novelist. I studied creative writing in college, and I'm a terrible short story writer. I can't ever seem to finish a short story, maybe because I want to turn them all into novels. But I knew that the language had to be true to these characters. It couldn't be my voice. It had to be the voice of some other entities, people. And writers talk about, I think a lot of fiction writers talk about this, and it sounds kind of silly, but these characters come and they visit you. Like, you don't have a tremendous amount of control at some level over what happens when you sit down to write a character. And that was definitely true of Nellie. It was her voice that appealed to me first, right? Like, I could just kind of hear this woman and the monologue that she had, where she's processing all of these incredibly difficult things about being who she is. Some of them have to do with the choice that she made to marry this man, but some of them have to do with just the fact that she's a black woman. And if I psychoanalyze myself, I know where that voice kind of comes from at a deep level, but at another level, I don't know where that comes from. Yeah. So part of the challenge of the book was respecting the voices of the various characters and the particular music that each character speaks with. I think every person speaks with their own music, for sure.
That's something that I don't know it's talked about a lot, even amongst us writers, is the fact that you have these characters, and at some point, they take on a life of their own, and you can't force them to be what you want them to be. They have to be who they're going to be.
Yeah, they're still people. That's the weird thing about characters. They're not real, but they're still persons, and so you have to respect them like you would any other person in your life, right? They have, I think when I teach fiction, I talk about the personhood of the character, and it's like, that's something that we need to think about. Like, the way you approach character probably says something about the way you treat other people in real life, you know? But yeah, I mean, they have an integrity all their own, and they're just like real people in that they're very unpredictable and uncooperative. And they'll surprise you and disappoint you kind of in equal measure.
Yeah, I've had quite a number of scenes where my characters, I wanted to go in one direction, they went into a completely different direction, and I'm staring at the page like, whoa, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And I'm the one writing it.
Yes. They'll tell you when you're wrong about asking them to do something. It is, you enter some really strange imaginative space, I think, writing fiction that is a little bit different than poetry. I like that my practice is such that I can visit both places, but I would say visiting that place of fiction and character, it can be more exhausting. And it can make more demands on me. I wouldn't say that that's a universal thing, right? But that's definitely true with this book, I would say. Some of the characters were particularly demanding. I would say Nellie not so much, but some of the others for sure.
How did you come up with the unconventional format of the book? Because you don't even use chapters.
Yeah, so the story there is this started life as a short story that quickly became a novella, and I took it to one of my mentors, and it was much, much shorter, and the plot wasn't almost even the same. But the basic idea was there. There was the voice of Nellie, there was the voice of the Baroness, there was this sort of romantic triangle, or at least some sort of triangular relationship between these two women and this man. But all the sections were kept together. So there was like one big Nellie section and one big Baroness section, and then one big like third person section. And I showed it to my mentor, and he handed it back to me, and he said, well, it's a bit much all at once. So what I did is I literally took the individual pages of the manuscript as it existed at that time, and I cut them into pieces, almost like I was editing film. And I thought about how to reorder them almost like I was collaging it. So I was looking for sort of natural breaks within these longer sections and where there were echoes and associations with things happening elsewhere in the story. And I just reassembled it that way. And I guess I was probably also thinking a little bit about how Monk's music turns on a lot of juxtapositions and unexpected turns as well. And I kind of wanted the form of it to also evoke the feeling of his music. And that was kind of the strategy that I came upon. But it was also really helpful, I have to say, and I've heard other writers talk about this, to actually like lay out the manuscript visually and see the individual pages like that, just kind of all spread out. I don't know what about that is useful, but somehow you perceive the story different, or at least I did, once I did that. So yeah, that's the origin of the structure. And then we added, over the many years it took to finish this novel, we added those headings that sort of help you see the connections between the various sections. Right?
I think it's absolutely brilliant. And in doing so, you've created your own work of art. And Writing Tip 101, laying your book out really does help you to put it in a different perspective.
Have you ever done that?
I haven't laid my book out, but what I've gotten into the habit, I read them out loud, or I have the computer read it out loud to me, because it sounds different.
Yes.
You hear it different than how you write it, and that gives you a sense of how other people are going to perceive it also.
Yeah, and I think what you say about it being a work of art is actually really useful for writers to think about, because when you think about silent reading or how we typically read, you don't think about your senses being engaged, but you're perceiving something. And so it's useful, I think, as part of your artistic practice, to build in different ways to perceive the work, like to hear it. You know, poets can't do their work without hearing it at some point in the writing process, in the composing process.
Well, I don't know if it's just because of the subject of this book or your writing style,
Right.
but it comes across to me as very rhythmic, very musical. And my books have been described as very visual. In fact,
Yeah.
when I'm hearing it read back to
Yeah.
me, if I can't picture it, then I scratch it and start
Yeah.
over again. You know, audio, video. We need to do a movie together.
Yeah, that's right.
What's the biggest takeaway that you want people to gain from this book?
That's a really great question. I think ultimately the thing that I think is most important, if I can say that about the book, is it's reminding us of just how messy history is and how history is this story that we carry with us everywhere that we go every day. And it's very useful to us, and it helps us just kind of get through our days. But there's real value in stopping and thinking very carefully about how that history is actually constructed and what it leaves out. And if you look at history, there are systemic things about it that need to be thought about and need to be addressed. For example, the fact that often people of color and women are left out of history. And the history does not happen without the participation of every human being. So I think that's part of it. And that's sort of at a sort of structural level, if you will. But I think also I would hope people would just come away from it feeling like they made a connection with a character or several characters. You know, Nellie is a very lonely person at a pretty fundamental level. And if making contact with her loneliness helps people to understand the ways in which they feel lonely sometimes better, or helps to assuage the loneliness that they feel at times, then I couldn't ask for anything more.
It was really great having you on the show
Thank
today.
you so much. I really enjoyed talking with you about a variety of things.
Where can readers find you online?
So I have a website. It's joemilazzo.com. There's a dash between Joe and Milazzo. That's my author website. It's going to have links to this book and various other things that I'm doing, various other writings, and even some information about other events that I'm involved in here around town.
And with that, we're going to wrap up another episode. Man, Joe is super interesting, and I really appreciate what he did with his book. I could talk to that guy for days. So in the previous episode, we talked about classical music. In this episode, we talked about jazz and poetry. And ironically, I've got some poets coming up. So I love the way everything is starting to fit in together. And as always, if you have any questions or comments about a particular episode, or you know an author who you think would be a good fit, let me know. Send me an email at info@ch1podcast.com or connect with me on social media. I'm on Facebook, the Twitter, Pinterest, and I would love to hear from you. So man, the podcast has been really busy, which is a great thing, and I've got a lot of great things coming your way. So stay tuned and I'll keep you posted. Till next time.